gives me chills every time. For someone who wanted to start playing each game in the series for the first time in February, I still felt a wave of excitement rush over me as Devil May Cry 5 splashed onto the screen for the first time. That excitement would turn into adrenaline that wouldn't subside until the very end of my playthrough. The focus around 3 central characters, all with their own unique, highly polished combat style, pushed the system to new heights of depth. The story is fantastic, with your emotions being tied to all the characters you've come to love and even awesome newcomers like Nico. The graphics and facial animations are top-notch, the soundtrack is killer, and of course, it has some incredible bosses. Before we start, I want to mention that I did my playthrough on the normal difficulty, so expect my perspective on the bosses to be based around that level. Additionally, I decided to swear off the use of the revive system so I would have to get good enough to overcome each boss unassisted. I also tried my best to take a stylish approach to combat, but keep in mind that I'm still pretty new to this series, so I'm liable to panic and go for the old triple triangle every now and again. Finally, I want to encourage you to stick around till the end of the video for a special announcement that requires your participation. With all that in mind, let's get started with my ranking of the Devil May Cry 5 bosses from worst to best. Kicking things off at the butt of our list with number 12, Glyphoth Roots. If we're gonna consider this thing a boss, then there's no question in my mind that it's the worst in the game. I mean, it has the boss health bar and everything, so I guess it counts. And it's not like I haven't praised the design of tutorial bosses in the past. Being that I'm a chronic victim of boss fever, I would much rather be educated in how to play a game in trial by fire in a watered down boss battle than your standard instructional affair. But when I say watered down, I mean only simple enough that it isn't a burden to a learning player. It should still pose some kind of threat, especially for a game that is going to turn the difficulty dial up to 11 down the line. Then again, I have to admit it at least posed a threat to me because I was still struggling to figure out the function of Devil Breaker in comparison to the Devil Bringer. Even so, Glyphoth Roots will mostly sit there and take any punishment you dish out without resistance. Sure, it'll swing a root every now and again or send some burrowing through the ground to surprise you, but the danger here is about that of a speed bump with Nero being a monster truck barreling through. For that reason, even as a tutorial boss, I think the Roots are uninspired enough to earn the bottom spot on our list. Number 11, Nidhogg. It's as if the Glyphoth got a fungus and it mutated into this stabby dingleberry hanging off of its roots. Forgive me, their mechanics are not quite the same, in part because Nidhogg does offer a bit more offense than his lower ranked peer, but also because you're playing as a different character, V. Playing as V feels like acting as a sort of distance mage that has all the same gun and melee capabilities you would expect from a DMC character. You essentially get to play it safe, running around and focusing on dodging while letting your familiars do all the attacking. Of course, while getting to do multiple actions simultaneously is a big advantage, managing all your inputs while maintaining style isn't quite so simple. If you can do it effectively enough to stay alive and farm you up some DT, then you can summon the big boy in to wreck some house. Nightmare runs on autopilot and 16 cans of whoop ass, so that's my primary strategy when playing V. Dodge while spamming attacks from Griffin and Shadow so I can summon Nightmare to bring the pain worthy of his name. Nidhogg is a creative enough boss that tries to counter these strengths and add some challenge though. There are 3 lesser heads and then the main Nidhogg body to focus on. You have to pay attention to each and be prepared to dodge at any time, all while monitoring the health of your phantoms and hitting the correct inputs for their success. After slaying the 3 lesser heads, you get a stun window to unleash attacks on Nidhogg himself, and then he'll attack for a while before resummoning them for another cycle. That was the only time I felt like I was in a strong amount of danger. His attacks are pretty quick if you're careless, and he caught me off guard more than once. That was my overall problem with Nidhogg. I didn't feel the majority of the fight put me in enough danger to be an engaging challenge, making it far less rewarding than his peers. Number 10, Geryon Knight. The Geryon Knight brings plenty of excitement and nostalgia to a tiny arena that puts more pressure on the player in contrast to Nidhogg's generously sized battle zone. Nevertheless, it continues to be a subpar challenge with V letting his phantoms run rampant, allowing your personal focus to be entirely on dodging. Once again, it is a balance of pressing a lot of different buttons and directional sticks at once, which becomes dramatically more complex when you're going for style, but I personally found it to be manageable enough. And that's what's disappointing here. While Geryon Knight shares interesting design with his predecessors such as charges, swings, range magic, and time slows, it's not enough to overwhelm your ability to hide behind your familiars and dodge periodically. I just think there's something a bit broken about being able to dish out all that damage from the safety of a distance and even continue to attack while you dodge. It works better during the standard combat because there are multiple targets to focus on and inversely that can focus on you, but I think it works poorly without the bosses having a higher level of aggression. That very well may come on the higher difficulties, but for a normal battle with a Geryon Knight, he barely manages to get the edge over Nidhogg only thanks to his slightly higher level of aggression. Number 9, Malphas. How far we've fallen from waifus like Nevin. What did we do to deserve 3 horror-esque dolls on the back of a stripped chicken? Fortunately, while it may look creepy and grotesque, this diverging appearance is a large part of its solid design. The chick does range magic and range melee that requires you to be constantly on the move, and when that doesn't suffice, the chicken will bring pain via direct melee. It's great, but what is missing is any shred of consistent, demanding pursuit that is difficult to deal with. Sure, the chicken will enrage every now and again, and when it does connect, it hits like a truck going 700 miles per hour. But other than that attack, you can easily wander around the outskirts of the arena firing charge shots off. This will eventually stun the bird and allow you time for a few combos on the dolls. It was weird too, sometimes the dolls would just sit there and take it, but other times they would at least bother to send out spikes at you. I did enter this fight with about half health and died a few times while figuring out that range was a better tactic than straight up melee. Oddly enough, the game advised on the loading page that its rampage was the best time to go in for some melee strikes. I did try snatching my way over to it during that attack after that advice, and it did work pretty well, but it was so much riskier than firing from a distance and then going in during a safer time. With my range strategy, I don't think the fight would be too difficult to do with high style and no damage, but even with it being trap shooting and meleeing when it falls, it's still plenty amusing to fight. I just think it could have had more depth if it pursued you more frequently outside of the raging rush, which prevents it from ascending higher on the list. Number 8, Gilgamesh. This is about as close as you could get to a puzzle-type fight over heavy combat substance in Devil May Cry. It's a behemoth monster that is as simple as ankle biting to propel yourself upward to the weak point on its back. It has deterrents such as laser shots, spikes like a porcupine, and even discs that will track you and damage you in the later phase, but with the right timing on your aerial maneuvers, you can stay airborne and keep attacking it until it turtles, hiding its weak point. Even if you do get knocked down, getting back up is easy peasy. What makes it so fun though is challenging myself to try to stay on its back as long as possible. Otherwise, it would be a matter of slowly going for damage over the course of yo-yoing from ground to back endlessly. I still would argue that the simplicity of the design is charming either way. Not every boss has to be ball-blisteringly difficult. This was a nice little pit stop before continuing on in the story, and though it won't be the most memorable moment of the experience, it's a worthwhile part of it. Number 7, the Malay Island Trio. If you played the game, this is essentially fighting against V, which is pretty awesome, because it allows you to enter one more nostalgic brawl against the army of Mundus before the finale. Griffin will show off some of his various energy attacks, including basic shots, AoE shocks, and lasers. You'll have to deal with that devastating Venus flytrap attack among others from the shadow, and Nightmare, well, kinda lumbers around doing dramatic amounts of damage if he manages to connect with you. The odd thing is, despite being triple teamed, I didn't find managing the fight to be overly challenging. Each of them does have an HP limit like in battling with V, and they can take a lot of punishment when stuck in orb form. Griffin does pose a threat from range, but as long as you keep him in sight, it's not too bad dodging his assaults. Shadow posed the largest threat, but it's nothing compared to his DMC1 counterpart. Finally, Nightmare is laughable compared to when you use him as V. I don't know if I got lucky or something, but he didn't seem to do all that much, and his stature made him an easy target. But in the end, I don't think the point of this battle was for it to be a challenge. If anything, it's a send-off for a few foes that have been holding on to resentment for Dante since they got fried in the OG Devil May Cry. And I'm sure if they could help V finish the mission they couldn't by helping him throughout the game, that must have been enough for them. For the nostalgia bomb, story significance, and decent quality battle, I give it the nod just outside the top half of the list. Number 6, Artemis. This is where I believe the boss quality makes a significant spike upward. That's to say that while I do enjoy the bosses on the first half of our list for what they are, what remains are the battles that I truly love and define my experience. For Artemis, I initially thought this was going to be a ranged battle requiring gun usage, which sure, that's an option if you're a dodge god and want the battle to take ages. Rather than that monotony, you're encouraged to chase the demon around while not only avoiding her various energy waves, but also the sentient energy shooters that she unleashes around the arena. Your goal? Getting close and wail on her. But that's easier said than done with all that's going on. The first half is pretty easy to hang with her, but in the middle she goes through her second phase by heading high in the sky to charge up something terrifying. If you'd rather avoid finding out what it is, be sure to use her energy shooters to zip your way up and knock her out of it. Afterward, her attacks become far more frequent and the challenge of chasing her down grows as she speeds up her movement around the arena. This builds a perfect crescendo with the fight getting more heart pumping as the action builds until its conclusion. The only real big downside to the fight is that dodging so many ranged attacks can be a little bit overwhelming, but it does make me feel like this boss was adeptly crafted for Nero's airborne strengths, and it makes it a blast to take on. Number 5, Goliath. What a fantastic boss to follow up the humdrum of the Qliphotht roots. In fact, I'd like to blame my many deaths against him to the roots lulling me into a false sense of security. Yeah, it's totally that, not my propensity to avoid lock-on and continuously get swallowed by the jaws of strife.
You stink, loser.
Maybe so, but what I can thank Goliath for is forcing me to adapt to the game's lock-on. He may have reminded me of Beowulf in stature, but I learned early and often against him that I wouldn't be able to rely on some of the tactics I have in the past 2 games, namely using jumps instead of rolls to avoid attacks. His swipes feel too widespread to be consistently jumped over or even strafed most of the time, which is good. It means the AI is getting better and the margin for error is getting smaller. Once I adapted, I started to realize what was really missing for me, an air dodge. That's where the Gerbera Devil Breaker came into play. Once I started mixing in dodges, rolls, and then spiraling through the air with roulette spins and nice combos on the ground, I felt like I was really getting into the swing of things. It gave me an early appreciation for how much depth the various devil breakers were going to bring to the table. For Goliath himself, he starts off with a lot of basic melee combos. That portion won't last for long as you'll crash through the first floor. He'll then do a scripted swing of a pillar, and then you get a window to smack his face. Afterward, expect him to inhale everything in sight through his disgusting tummy mouth. As far as I can tell, when you're inside the building, it can only be avoided by sacrificing a devil breaker. Once outside though, it was a simple bit of outrunning it. On the outside is where the real battle begins. Fire AoEs, more aggressive charges and combos, it can be a lot to handle early on. But there are health orbs and devil breakers around the arena, plus his attacks leave his head vulnerable on the ground at times. It was an awesome first boss because it felt difficult to overcome, forced me to get good, and never felt unfair. It always felt like I was doing something wrong and I needed to get better. This helped as a wake-up call for the rest of the game and definitely stands as one of the better bosses within it. Number 4, Urizen. Holy shitballs, going up against the guy who wiped the floor with the entire Devil May Cry crew is an intimidating proposition to start off the game. This dude is like the Thanos of Devil May Cry. My guy doesn't even have to get off the throne to crack open a can of whoop ass on me. In a delightful twist, you can actually defeat Urizen in the prologue mission if you got the grit. I've yet to accomplish it for myself, but in my one attempt I did notice he has some slightly different mechanics than the rest. Once you take down his shield, you get a chance to attack him on the throne. He takes a surprisingly large amount of damage. I got about half his health and then his shield went back up. I noticed that his attacks grew more complex from there. For example, his laser duplicated and did more sweeps than before. If you manage to pull off the kill, you can save the world without playing the rest of the game. It's a neat Easter egg, but I'm sure you want to play the rest of the game. If you do, there are plenty more fights against Urizen to come. I'll note that I decided to rank all his fights as a single boss because though the fights do differ, particularly in Mission 17, I felt like Urizen delivered something that had only been done by Vergil since Devil May Cry 1. He evolved over the course of each battle, which is a boss format I find to be brilliant. You start with him overpowering you in the prologue. You eventually go back with Nero and get a chance to show your growth and take his shield down, only to be cast aside. And let me mention, taking his shield down was quite an ordeal for me. It took at least 6 to 7 attempts, and it's 100% because of my greed. Other than a small melee burst, the red crystal doesn't do anything to resist you, so it can be really tempting to unload everything you've got on it. But this is very much a fight where your lasting HP is key, so you have to resist the urge, otherwise you'll succumb to Urizen's many magic attacks. What I love about the attacks he employs is how varied they are. Each tail is notably different based on the color, and each requires something different of you to handle it. Some attacks are ground-based, others slow time to harm you, the sweeping laser must be jumped over in proper time, and those fireballs need to be strafed around quickly. I love how much the game expects you to overcome, and it was so gratifying once I pulled it off. The next fight with Dante is more of a tutorial for the Sin Dante mode, and even though the fight is farming for it and then laying the smackdown, the story implications are enough to drive it forward. Plus, who can deny that it isn't fun massacring Urizen with Dante's fully realized demonic power? The final piece of this boss comes in the form of a battle between brothers, one the warped demonic form of himself in its entirety, the other the Eater of Swords whose legend has grown to reach the heights of Sparta himself. After fighting for so long in those bloody veiny caverns and ruined cities, it's an unexpected yet very welcome choice to fight in this sunny plain. Urizen fights much like any of the bigger melee style boss enemies in the game, with slow but powerful melee combos. What makes him different is mixing in all the previous magic he had throughout the showdown. An underrated feature of this phase is that I love his tentacles being gone not only for his visual design, but it makes it so much easier to see what you're doing. For me, it made the most sense to conduct this battle in the air, so I found Trickster to be huge in allowing me to get air combos, then dodge behind and continue wailing on him. You do only get a single dodge in air before you have to touch the ground again, but if you time it with the right rhythm, your drop can actually be a dodge itself. I love these little complexities that Dante's styles add, because even though my playstyle worked, I could easily see you pairing his melee strikes with Royal Guard and then unleashing the stored up pain back at him. If you can't quite pull that off, you'll get a chance to use your stored up DT for Sin form, and that is when the real punishment comes in. I found I could do the most damage by using Stinger, unleashing a combo, then using the square and triangle attack right at the end of the DT bar for a finisher. Every now and again, Urizen gets stunned, and if you can time this with your Sin form, it's game over for him. Story-wise, it's absolutely absurd that Dante allows Vergil's human half to casually walk up to the demon who nearly killed him, Trish, Lady, Nero, and just about everyone else on the goddamn planet. Just because he's human doesn't mean you should give him the benefit of the doubt. They are born of the same exact desire, power. Doesn't mean that despite Dante and Nero's naivete, I wasn't squealing with glee when Vergil showed up in all his original glory. Even with that teasing the main event, Vergil's time as Urizen is not only one to remember, but the evolved design over the course of the game deserves a lot of praise. The only thing holding the fight back for me is that it's perhaps a bit too lengthy each time you fight him, and dealing with his magic attacks can be a bit frustrating if you can't manage your offense versus defense appropriately. Nonetheless, it's still one of the best fights Devil May Cry 5 has to offer. Number 3, Cerberus. Another nostalgic throwback, this time to the amazing Devil May Cry 3 with the self-proclaimed king of all Cerberuses is. Cerberi? Cerber-they? I have no idea. The dialogue is reminiscent, but the fight is nothing like it was before. This pupper has fire, ice, and lightning at his disposal. Each element has a very distinctive moveset. Lightning will send out a dozen homing light balls and then breathe a lightning beam at you. The fire variant likes to get up close and personal, shouting about how his flames are better than not only burials, but the best in general over ice and lightning. Don't know why you're talking shit about your other heads, but okay, buddy. Ice creates a bunch of formations on the ground and then sends ice bombs in waves to crush you. This fight is so creative, and the throwback is icing on the cake that evolves far beyond the original fight that was wonderful in its own right. The only downside is that Sin Double Trigger makes it an easier affair than it would be otherwise, especially when you consider how many white orbs they gave you on the way down here. Seriously, they give you like 50 white orbs throughout Mission 16, but it's still a damn fine boss nonetheless design-wise. The final cutscene nails in the nostalgia, but continues to show how far this game has grown with the new triple header of a Cerberus weapon to match the formidable king of Cerberi. Number 2, Cavaliere Angelo. All of Devil May Cry 4, I was waiting for a knight fight that can match the speed of Dante's Swordmaster skills. Though that unfortunately never came, Cavaliere Angelo delivered what I had been seeking in a big way. He has a shield and his magic attacks range from slow, lumbering swings that do massive damage if they connect, range magic, and teleports mixed in between all of it to throw you off. Balancing all this between the offense you can unleash is an adrenaline rush. Even though I mentioned in my previous video that it's difficult for me to go for high levels of style my first time fighting a boss, Dante's Swordmaster skills match my playstyle perfectly to the point I was able to go aerial and unleash a bunch of connected combos to make Cavaliere my stylish bitch, at least for the first phase. At the halfway point, he buffs with a huge AoE and doubles down on everything I mentioned. This caused the adrenaline to pump faster and faster as I subsequently dished out parries, jumped over swings perfectly, rolled right before his swings came crashing down, smashed him with DT-powered stingers, the list is endless. This boss is a perfect playground for Dante's playstyle, and I only made use of one of the 4 styles. There is so much untapped depth here that I can't wait to see what he's like in future playthroughs on higher difficulties. Though I will say that a strength of facing him in your first playthrough is that Sin DT isn't available, which could trivialize this fight. Plus, I have to mention you turn the guy into a badass demon motorcycle weapon. All of Dante's weapons in this game are fantastic, but conceptually, this is the most preposterously awesome. Cavaliere's fight is as sensational as the weapon it awards you with, but even with him being this spectacular, I'm sure you all could guess who would take the top spot. And the number 1 best boss in Devil May Cry 5, Vergil. Who else could it have been? In the end, you get to fight Vergil not once, but twice with each Dante and Nero, and both are phenomenal. Let's start with Dante. First, I decided not to use Sin form in this fight. Not as a self-imposed restriction to make it harder, but because I thought I needed normal DT for HP regen and as a power boost to shorten Vergil's DT phases. That's right, Vergil is back in all of his glory. Well, most of it anyway. In comparison to his DMC3 counterpart, this Vergil is a smidge less aggressive. He teleports less and it feels like his arsenal isn't quite as stocked as it was before. By that I mean that he'll do a few different things in each phase and it makes it more realistic to remember the possibilities and manage them. What I'm hinting at is that while this fight with Vergil isn't as unpredictable, that's actually a pro, not a con. While I do love the absolute heart-pumping melee romp in DMC3, this fight has a more deliberate pace that requires as much precision, but in a different way. To start, Vergil will do one of a few things. Either a great slash forward, call upon a single range magic orb, glow blue and try to do a devastating grab, or fire magic swords at you one by one. All of these have different tells such as the blue glow or verbal cues that allow you to handle them as you memorize his patterns. I've seen videos of this guy being decimated by Royal Guard, but my personal method as a newbie was to use Trickster to dodge his assaults efficiently, Stinger quickly in for the attack opportunity, then switch to Swordmaster and use the benefits of its double strikes to do the most damage. With Vergil, I limited my combo creativity because I think this fight is one that will take me some time to instinctually react enough that I can hold my style up. So instead I chose to do basic triangle combos and stingers, though I did mix in some Swordmaster play. After enough of this, Vergil will bring on the DT, and that was my cue to do the same. He'll regenerate health and start unleashing the aforementioned moves in more lethal formats in pairs of 3s. You can use this to your advantage to knock his health down for him to unleash his most devastating move, the flying fuck you. He'll fly around the arena and charge you 3 times, with each charge casting swords around you. It took me far too long to realize you could smack him off, so I just tanked the damage. Though even when you can shake them off, finding a window to do so is tough with him continuing his charge, and you do not want to get hit by that charge because it does a ton of damage. After it, phase 2 begins. He'll pop in and out of DT, summon a clone to mess with you, add in a few attacks like a scripted AoE 1000 cut devastation move among others. He'll also do his attacks with more aggression, often teleporting quicker and doing many at once before any reprieve. It's demanding of every ounce of your skill, thrilling to overcome, and handily my favorite fight in the game. The Nero portion is much of the same. I'm curious to hear your experiences, but my win rate on Vergil has been about 2 out of 10 with Dante, whereas both of my fights with Nero ended victorious. Vergil takes far more more damage from Nero and staggers due to his fatigue from fighting Dante, leaving him wide open for dramatic buster moves, especially if you get a few combos in first because he stays down for a while. There's not much new here that I experienced, but it's satisfying in its own way because of playing Nero and the story significance of Nero coming into his own and beating down Daddy Dearest. The back-to-back brawls are a perfect climax to what was easily one of the best games I've played in some time. What did you all think of Devil May Cry 5 and its bosses? To let us know, I've left a link to a survey in the description for you all to vote on the difficulty of the Devil May Cry 5 bosses yourself.
Round 2.
With there being variable difficulty standards and playstyles, vote based on your overall impressions and then leave a comment on this video with your thoughts for a chance to be featured during the upcoming ranking. I also want to answer a highly asked question on the DMC reboot. I didn't have time before the release of DMC 5, so I'll be giving it a look in the near future. Be sure to subscribe to stay up to date on all those upcoming rankings and more gaming content from the channel. As for today, I want to thank you all for watching, much love to you, and I'll see you in the next video.